Okay, so like a lot of PCAN, we are collaborating with people from other sites so that this talk at least has big components of Stephen Hartley, who's at Victoria. Chris Willey, I'm going to talk about, he's on a lizard PhD, he's also at Victoria. Deb Wilson's a Landfill research colleague at Lincoln. Is forward to the right?
Yes,
Yeah, the right hand.
to the right.
Okay. Once habitat is adequate, which is a clear first requirement, predator control might be useful. And I suppose most people in this room would think these are the kinds of reasons that we do it. We've had a great story with Tui restoration here. We're after slightly more iconic and perhaps demanding things. So here, Kariria falcon, they turn up, and Kiruru, we've got some. And I'm really interested in lizards. I mean, one of the good things about them is that they perhaps can be restored in much smaller habitat areas than the birds can. So, and they're beautiful and iconic. I'm going to say a bit about lizards. But remember too that some of the animals I'm going to talk about, the rats in particular, carry diseases, and they also damage houses and they destroy food. So it's not just a nature conservation story about controlling these pests. And so I'm going to be talking about these animals. I'm sure it's the normal range of culprits. It turns out that mustelids are really rare in cities. I'm going to show you a bit of information, but they are. Tell you up front. And some of these others are really common. Obviously cats are, and we have a lot of hedgehogs, a few possums, and there's quite a few rodents. There's a picture of a Norway rat at the bottom and a ship rat at the top, and people who know me will know that I love to tell people to name them by species because they're slightly different to each other. But just remind you at this point that those three in the bottom right-hand corner there are the three most widely distributed mammals on the planet, probably after humans, and so their general distribution through the habitats I'm going to show you here is absolutely no surprise to anybody, nor the difficulties of limiting their populations. So what we're doing in PCAN is measuring the abundance of these in cities. There's been a little bit of measurement done before. We're working across mainly Dunedin, Wellington and Hamilton. We're also sampling right now, as it happens, in New Plymouth and in Tauranga. And in all of these we've used standard methods to target the mammals I've just shown you. So the locations that we've picked are residential areas, amenity parks and kind of wild reserves. And so residential areas are obviously people's houses and backyards. Amenity parks are basically grassed areas, and in general we're sampling bushy bits on the edge of them. And wild reserves in Hamilton, places like Jubilee Reserve and Waiwhakariki, where we're going this afternoon. You imagine we can't use kill traps and things, so the residual trap catch for possums is out, and so we're using tracking tunnels, cue cards, and trail cameras, and there's a bit of a dazzling array of possibilities, that different baits and different numbers of nights, and I'm going to present some data. We're only 3/4 of the way through our program, like all of PCAN, and so there's some rough graphs, but don't worry, I'll hold your hand through them. And here are the tools. You'll be familiar with these. Tracking tunnels are a bit older than cue cards. They're generally good for rats and mice and hedgehogs, typically baited with peanut butter for those animals, and also with a thing called erase, which is used as a bait for carnivores, especially stoats. So we set 1 night for those, for the rats and mice, and then 6 nights with erase. Cue cards have peanut butter jammed in the end of Corfu plastic, like real estate agent signs, and things chew it and you can recognise their bite marks, and it works pretty well for rats and possums. And trail cameras are a really exciting, almost the only exciting, new tool to monitor carnivores in New Zealand. People are using them all over the whole landscape, and they're especially good for mustelids, for stoats and ferrets, weasels, and for cats, which are otherwise difficult to monitor. But you can imagine that everything that triggers a camera will be detected on it, and so it's a kind of a backup for the others. It's a cat in that middle dark green one. It's a black cat on the left hand side. It might be hard to see. And that's Neil Fitzgerald's legs. So any of you would be interested. But so this is so these devices are put out kind of 50-metre intervals. This is Hamilton Gardens. There's a camera at each end of the line, and the devices are scattered through those sites. So here come the formidable graphs. So in Pecan there's been a lot of student involvement. This is on the MSc that Stephen Hartley supervised by Cherie Balls at Vic. And we shared our queue cards and tracking tunnel cards between all the cities. And she, poor soul, sort of went through and matched up. We had people quite independently ID different, all the cities were ID'd by other cities. And helpfully, she's found quite high consistency of identification between all the cities. And in looking at the difference between the devices, the two cards she thought were good for possums and rats. Mice are there, but there's a risk that the mice prints being smaller obscured by the other species. And the tracking tunnels are very good for hedgehogs, rats and mice. But neither of those devices really detected many mustelids. And the graph there it shows the difference between 1 nights and 6 nights, and between two cards and tracking tunnels. So the stripy graphs on the right of each of those is the tracking tunnels, and it's 2 cards on the left. And so within each of those, it's the 1 night and the 6 night. And so you can see that in general, 6 nights detects kind of twice the number or twice the number of cards are detected after 6 nights compared to 1, which is probably no surprise. So if we will end up recommending some kind of standard method for monitoring mammals in cities, and it's likely to be chew and track cards for 6 nights plus cameras at the moment. Right, so here start these graphs, and these are actually 1 night tracking tunnel indices for rats and mice, which I've used because we can compare that with the 1 night indices that's been standard operating practice all across New Zealand. And I'm going to show you 3 cities, and I'll hope if I can talk you through this and you can stick with these graphs. So this is Dunedin. One of the interesting, this is Dunedin, Hamilton and Wellington. Dunedin had the most hedgehogs and the most possums. And the possums are the orange ones you can see in the natural habitats there. That's where most of them are, and that's quite a high abundance. Almost no mustelids, which we're seeing everywhere. A lot of hedgehogs and scattered across all of the amenity, the natural and the residential sites, and really not many rats, to be honest. That's the other red ones. So that's Dunedin. Wellington, well, the graphs are a lot lower and there's almost no possums. So possums are orange on that graph, and good luck finding any. I think they had 1 or 2 in one amenity site, so they are really, really on top of possums. On the other hand, they've got quite a few rats, notwithstanding all the predator-free initiatives in Wellington that you've heard about. And predictably, from controlling shipwrecks, you get more mice. So they have got more mice than other sites, and again, almost no mustelids. So here's Hamilton. We have kind of moderate numbers of everything. We have a few possums really in the natural area. No possums at all detected in residential. Hedgehogs across all the sites, as they have been in all of the cities. And a few rats here and there. So Hamilton, we've got kind of lowish numbers, some of which will be a tribute to the control that's done around these amenity and natural areas in Hamilton. Just to move to the trail cameras, and this is there are tens of thousands of images coming off the cameras. This is a preliminary collation, just crudely the number of photos of these species. I think these colours might be a bit different here. So we just start with the very top one. So that's cats. Cats are that dark green. So if you look at residential, that will be no surprise to you. There are hundreds and hundreds of photographs of cats. And they are also in natural areas and amenity areas. So the rats are red, and so there's a lot of rat photos. And some of those will be shipwrecks and some are Noi rats, and we haven't gone through them all yet to tell you, how many there are. My guess is there'll be 50-50, or maybe a few more shipwrecks than always. Just to go down a bit, so the hedgehogs are kind of this washed out yellow thing, and there's hedgehogs again in all of the sites, so they're kind of spread across. And there is actually one mustelid here, which is found in a natural area. So if you look above the word autumn for natural, you'll see a tiny little bit of colour, and there it is. This is a ferret that was a little affidavit, turned up at Hammond Park at 2:38 a.m. on the 6th of November. So it's extremely rare to have mustelids in town. And just in passing, I think that at least some of that is because cats eat stoats. I don't know if you know that. It's in a way one of the little ways that cats might protect birds. Because cats eat shipwrecks and cats eat stoats, and so there's this curious difficult net outcome thing about cats. We've had some great students work for a couple of summers with us looking at urban bird nest success. So they've been finding nests in our study sites in Hamilton. This is just the crude percent success, 40 or 63% in the 2 years. Most of the failures are due to predation. There are also desertions, but most are predations. Other studies from urban areas, one from Hamilton and one from Dunedin, also show really high nesting success. The number at the bottom is just the mean of a whole lot of studies that were done in wild environments. So there's some irony in the lowish numbers of rats. 10 minutes. The lowish numbers of rats and the absence of mustelids in towns gives a curious protection in a way to some fauna in cities. And I just think that, you know, we're in this zone where habitat shortage is predictably, or habitat quality, the two together, are, you know, may well be limiting factors in cities compared to predators. But it's a curious advantage in towns that predation rates at bird nests are lower. So just to turn to lizards. So see, I'm really fond of lizards. I mean, I don't know if you know, but there are more endemic lizard species known in New Zealand now than land birds. And so I think it's about 110 species. People are still finding new lizards in New Zealand. And they're not well known. They're very beautiful. They're obviously internationally unique and special. And they can exist in quite small habitat areas. And so they're a great, I think, focus for urban restoration. This is a picture of Chris Woolley, who's the PhD candidate I talked about, supervised by Nikki Nelson at Victoria University. And the picture on the right is one of his pitfall traps, so you can't see it, but that's actually I think it's a 4-litre white plastic bucket buried at ground level with the lid just raised a little bit to keep the rain out. And so Chris has been trapping lizards in cities. And under his hand there is stuff called onduline, so that's an artificial cover object which he puts out, and then again in standard ways across these cities to see what lizards he can find. And so these are some of his results. And Chris has written a paper reviewing what lizard species would be expected to have been in the cities he's working in and which ones are there now. And that's what this graph shows. And so this covers skinks and geckos, and it's the number of species is the vertical axis, and there are different cities. And so the white is species that have been lost, species that by their present distribution or historical notes or records would have been found in these places and now they're gone. And I guess you can see that probably more than half are gone. And perhaps especially for geckos. So Hamilton is a place where, although I've asked at various talks that I've given, no one's ever told me they've seen a gecko in Hamilton. So I could do it again here. Has anyone here got a gecko story? No. So we had geckos and they're gone, and you can see that we have also lost most of our skinks. So these are Chris's current surveys, Hamilton, Wellington, Nelson and Dunedin, and some cities have a lot more skinks than us, than they have species. He only found 3 skink species across these 3 cities, which is not a big fauna. We're the only ones that have rainbow skinks, which are also known as plague skinks. I don't know if you know about them. They're very small. They lay eggs in soil, and they can be transmitted around by plants moving, which is a kind of a dilemma for revegetation. But there's a lot of them, in particular Innis Common, which is the site that's got the big spike of them there. And other than that, we have copper skinks, which are beautiful. And so there's a copper skink, a couple of pictures there of copper skinks. And on the right, that's a picture of a rainbow skink. You can just see it's got a sort of sheen on its side, and they're small and slender. They've got quite long tails, and so if you can see, it's sort of, and they bask a lot in the daytime, and they're often very abundant. So you might be able to pick rainbow skinks, and no geckos from Hamilton. Okay, this is my last slide. As I said, we've got. What have we got, about 16 months or 17 months to go in this program. So we have furious write-ups coming up in the coming year, but the fieldwork is not finished because the next stage of this is that in all different cities we are intensifying predator control at some key sites, and we also have non-treatments, and so we're monitoring the outcome of that for predators and for biodiversity. And that's our remaining 15 months. Thank you.